Okay, so we're going to look at some factoring. This is what you'll be doing tomorrow. It's going to stem from what you did today, which was factoring out a GCF. What we're going to be looking at specifically is factoring by grouping. I put the parentheses out next to that so that you know that we're going to be using parentheses when we do this. We're going to use them as grouping symbols, so that's why it's factor by grouping. We will use this when there's 4 terms in the polynomial. Important note when we're factoring, and this applies to any method regardless of what we're doing, the factors must be prime. So in your final answer, your factors must be broken down to the point where it cannot be simplified. So something like 4x plus 8 would not be considered prime because there is a GCF of 4 that we could factor out of that. So they have to be prime for your final answer. Okay, so we started with an initial polynomial here. I'll write it over here real quick. This was your original problem. We had this right here. So 4qr plus 8r plus 3q plus 6. So this is what we started with. When you see 4 terms, you need to think, okay, I need to factor by grouping. Okay, back over here now. So what I've done is I've grouped the first 2 terms of the polynomial and the second 2 terms of the polynomial. And I've done that using parentheses. So that's your step 1, is to group the first 2 terms and the second 2 terms. Your step 2 is going to be to factor out a GCF from each set of parentheses. So from this first set of parentheses, I noticed that both terms have a 4 in common. Both terms also have an r in common. Both terms do not have a q, so that is not part of our GCF. So my GCF for this first set of parentheses is a 4r. And then just like your work from today, you're going to write down what's left inside the parentheses. So what would be left from 4qr after we factor out a 4r would be a q. And then after we factor out a 4r from 8r, we would be left with a plus 2. And then we move on to your second set of parentheses. Our GCF on this side would be a 3. And that is a positive 3. I'm going to go ahead and write the plus with that, and you'll see why in just a moment. What would be left would be a q. And then if we factor out a 3 from 6, we'd be left with a plus 2. Now notice that both of our parentheses now contain the same thing. It's a q plus 2. This is important. For the grouping to work, you have to have matching parentheses, okay? So as long as you have that, you're good. If you have parentheses that do not match, you need to go back a step and reevaluate your GCF, make sure that you've done all of that correctly. Okay, your next step, I think 4 it was, you're going to write what's inside the parentheses as a final factor. So this is part of your final answer here. So these 2, you're only going to write it once. You are then going to take what was on the outside, which would be the 4r and a positive 3, and write it just like that. So we picked up the 4r and then plus 3, and we basically put the GCFs together in their own set of parentheses. So this is actually your answer right here. This is your final answer. Now let's talk about what this means, because I'm throwing all these words at you, and I want to make sure you understand what it is that we're doing. Factors, if you remember, are 2 things that you multiply in order to obtain a certain product. So 6 and 7 are factors of 42. 21 and 2 are also factors of 42. So there's a couple of different factors you can have. However, the factors are what we multiply to get there. So what this means, now that we have factored by grouping, we can multiply these 2 sets of parentheses together, and it would get us back to where we started, which was this 4-term polynomial here. So if you want to check, all you would have to do is take the answer that you've gotten and FOIL it to get back to your original answer. If you FOIL and you get these exact terms, then you know that your answer is correct. If not, then you need to go back and reevaluate something, make sure you FOILed it correctly, and make sure that you factored it correctly as well. Okay, let's look at another one. Let's do 2xy minus 12x plus 42 minus 7y. Okay. Just, you don't have to do this, but this is just something that I got in a habit of doing. I always put my constant term on the end. So my 42 here is my constant term, and I would really rather have it over here on the right. So that's what I'm actually going to do first. I'm just going to rearrange it. Just these last two terms, I'm just going to move those around. Just because I don't like my constant being in the middle. I prefer for that to be on the end. So I'm going to rewrite that first of all. So the 7y is negative, so make sure you bring that over with it. And then my 42 is positive. Okay, so now I'm going to start. So now I'm ready to group. So I'm going to group. I'm going to cut that in half. The negative is actually inside those parentheses there. I go ahead and keep whatever operation sign is on this third term. I go ahead and keep that inside the parentheses because that helps when I'm factoring. From the first set of parentheses, you're going to have a 2x that you factor out. 2 is a factor of both 2 and 12. X is a factor of both those terms. Both terms do not have a y, so that is not part of my GCF. So I'm going to factor out a 2x. What would be left would be a y minus 6. And then to my other set of parentheses. Chances are, 9 times out of 10, if you have a negative here, you're probably going to be factoring that out when you factor out your GCF. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. And I'll show you why we're going to do that here in a minute. We'll do it the right way first, and I'll show you why not factoring out the negative would have caused a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and factor out this negative 7. What's left on the inside would be a y and then a negative 6, because if we take 42 and divide it by a negative 7, we would have negative 6 left. So both sets of parentheses match. We have this. So now you're ready to just combine your pieces. So we've got y minus 6 that was present here and here. We're just going to write it once. And you have 2x minus 7. So that is your other set of parentheses. Okay. And again, you could FOIL these to your first, outer, inner, last, and you should get back to where we started up here. Okay. Now, I'm going to sidestep for a moment. I'm going to show you why, if we didn't factor out this negative, why that would not have worked. So let's say we go back to this. Let me rewrite. We had that. And then, okay. So, go back to this for a moment. Go ahead and factor out your 2x, and you're left with y minus 6. If I had just factored out a 7, say a positive 7, what would have happened was I would have been left with a negative y and a plus 6. Those sets of parentheses are not the same. Here my y is positive, here it's negative, and here my 6 is negative, here it's positive. So the signs were flip-flopped, which is not what we need. So this is how you know you've made a mistake somewhere. If you've got identical terms in the parentheses but your signs are different, it's because you should have factored out a negative and you just overlooked that. So that's a common mistake and a very easy fix. It's just it's an easy mistake to make. Okay, let's do one more. Let's see here. Do 3p minus 2p squared is 18p plus 27. Now, if you want to put your square term out front, that's fine. What you don't want to do is combine your like terms here. Don't do that because we are grouping, so we need 4 terms in order for this to all work out. My constant is on the end, so that's really the only thing I'm worried about rearranging. I'm not worried about moving the squared term up here to the front. However, if you want to do that, it's fine. Okay, so I'm going to split this up. From my first set of parentheses, I'm going to factor out a p, because that's the only thing that's common between these two. The 3 and the 2 don't have anything in common. And what would be left would be 3 minus 2p. And then over here on the right, I could factor out a 3, I could factor out, or 9, because the factors of 27 are 9 and 3, and then 27 and 1. So 9 would be the greatest common factor between the two. I'm going to factor out a negative 9, just because I see that negative here, and I know that over here, I'm probably going to need that to be negative, but we'll see what happens. And that would be p, 2p minus 3. Okay, now, when you look at this, you should be seeing a red flag somewhere, right? So here, my 2p is negative, here it's positive. Here, my 3 is positive, and over here it's negative. So those don't exactly match. So you need to recognize that as I've made a mistake somewhere. Because the terms are the same, I have a 2p and a 3 in both, their signs are just flip-flopped. So that should tell you that instead of pulling out a negative 9, we should have pulled out a positive 9, which would make the 2p a negative and the 3 a positive. Now we have parentheses that match. I'm going to go ahead and write it as 3 minus 2p for both of them. And then we have p plus 9. And there you go. This would be your final answer here. So this is factoring by grouping.